5 daughters. One Christmas Eve. One empty chair at the table I had set for all of them. By the time the sun rose on Christmas morning, I had made 5 phone calls, signed 3 documents, and shown my daughters something their father had never needed to show them before, that the man they had decided was disposable was the same man who held every single card. Welcome back to your ultimate destination for gripping revenge stories, family betrayals, shocking betrayals, and emotional justice. Subscribe now and join a community and tell us where you're watching from. Turn on the notification bell for our next story. Are you ready to witness the ultimate payback? Let's get started. I am Mr. ZAHA, and I am 68 years old. Let me tell you about the table first. Because the table is where this story begins, and the table is the image I keep returning to when I think about that night. The way it looked at 6 o'clock on Christmas Eve, set for 6 people, candles lit, the good china that hadn't come out since my wife Eleanor passed 4 years ago, the crystal glasses that she had always said were too nice for ordinary Tuesday evenings, but that she would have wanted used on a night like this. I had been cooking since 10 in the morning. A standing rib roast, Eleanor's recipe, the one she had made every Christmas for 31 years of our marriage. Green bean casserole, sweet potato gratin, rolls from the bakery on Maple Street because Eleanor always said life was too short to make your own rolls when the bakery did it better, and I had honored that particular wisdom long after she was gone. I had driven to the bakery on the 23rd specifically because they sold out by noon on Christmas Eve, and I knew this, and I planned accordingly, and I carried those rolls home in the brown paper bag with the string handles and placed them on the counter with the satisfaction of a man who has managed a small logistical victory. I had bought 6 rolls, one for each of us. I had set 6 places at the table. I had called each of my daughters in the week leading up to Christmas to confirm, not to remind them. They were adults. They did not need reminding of a commitment, but to share the details, to say come at 4 for drinks, dinner at 6, or something comfortable. I'll have the fireplace going. Each of them had said yes. Each of them had said they would be there. Lucy, 44, who lived in Charlotte with her husband David and their 3 children. Yes, Dad. We'll be there by 4. Julianne, 42, an interior designer in Raleigh. Yes, of course. I wouldn't miss it. Susan, 39, a high school principal in Greensboro. Dad, obviously yes. Stop asking. Margaret, 36, the quiet one. The reader, who worked as a librarian in Chapel Hill and drove a 10-year-old Subaru and cared more about used bookstores than real estate. Of course, Daddy. I've been looking forward to it. Pauline, 33, the youngest, who was between jobs and between apartments and between most things in the way of someone who was still figuring out the shape of her life, and who I worried about more than the others in the particular, helpless way that parents worry about the child who most reminds them of their own most vulnerable self. Yes, Dad. I'll be there. Yes. 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 I said 6 places. At 4 o'clock, no one had arrived. I told myself traffic. It was Christmas Eve. The highways between Charlotte and Greensboro and Raleigh and Chapel Hill and my house in Asheville were not friendly on Christmas Eve. I told myself this, and I poured myself a small glass of bourbon, and I sat in the living room with the fireplace going, and I waited. At 5, I called Lucy. Voicemail. I called Julianne. Voicemail. I called Susan. It rang 4 times, and then she picked up, and I heard in the background the unmistakable sound of a restaurant, silverware, ambient music, the close warmth of other people's conversations. Susan, I said. Are you? Dad. A pause. A pause of the specific quality that carries a decision inside it. I'm so sorry. We ended up going to Marcus's parents. It was kind of last minute, and I meant to call you. You meant to call me, I said. I know. I should have. I'm sorry, Dad. I called Julian back. She answered this time. She was at a friend's party in Raleigh. She had decided to stay over rather than drive on Christmas Eve. She was sorry. She had meant to mention it earlier. I called Lucy. She answered on the 3rd ring, and her voice had the particular bright, hollow quality of someone who had prepared an explanation and was glad to finally deliver it. They had decided to stay in Charlotte. David's parents had come into town unexpectedly, and of course it was easier not to drive. She was so sorry. We'd do something after the new year. Margaret did not answer. She texted, at 5:43, a single message, sorry, Daddy. Next year. Pauline did not answer at all. She did not text. She did not call back. I would not hear from Pauline for 11 days. I sat at my dining room table at 6 o'clock on Christmas Eve, and I looked at the six-place settings, and the good china, and the crystal glasses that Eleanor had always said were too nice for ordinary evenings. And I looked at the standing rib roast, and the green bean casserole, and the sweet potato gratin, and the 6 rolls in the basket in the center of the table, and I sat with what had just happened. None of them came. Not one. On Christmas Eve. After confirming. After promising. After yes, 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 yes. I am not a man who cries easily. I learned stoicism the way many men of my generation learned it. As a survival mechanism, as a professional necessity, as a basic condition of being taken seriously in the world. I had cried at Eleanor's bedside and at her funeral and in the car on the drive home from the cemetery, alone, which was the way I had decided that particular grief needed to happen. In the years since, I had not cried often. I cried that night, alone at my Christmas table with the good china and the candles burning down. Not for long, not dramatically, but honestly and entirely, and with the specific grief of a man who has just understood something he did not want to understand about the people he loves most. Then I wiped my face, put the roast in a storage container, blew out the candles, and went to bed. But I did not sleep. I lay in the dark of the bedroom I had shared with Eleanor for 31 years, in the house we had chosen together in Asheville when we were 42 and the girls were young and the future was a thing of enormous open possibility, and I thought, I am a deliberate man. I do not make decisions from the hot center of my feelings. I wait until the feeling has become clear and still, like water after sediment settles, and then I look at what is underneath it. What was underneath the grief of that night was something I had been choosing not to look at directly for a long time. Something that had been building, with the slow, patient accumulation of a structural problem, over the 4 years since Eleanor died. Eleanor had been the gravity of this family, not in the way that diminishes the word, not merely warm, not merely present, but gravitationally significant. The person around whom the orbit of the family organized itself. When she was alive, the girls came home. They came for Easter and Thanksgiving and Christmas and the occasional ordinary Sunday when Eleanor had called and said she was making something and it would be nice to see everyone. They came because she asked and because they loved her and because being with her felt like being in a place that was fundamentally safe. After Eleanor, the orbit decayed. Slowly at first, a missed Easter here, a shortened Thanksgiving visit there. Then faster, the calls from the girls becoming less frequent, the reasons for not visiting becoming more various, the particular quality of obligation that family love sometimes rests on becoming thinner and more intermittent. I had told myself it was grief, that they were processing Eleanor's loss in their own ways. That distance was how some people handled the pain of a diminished home. I had told myself many accommodating things. What I had not allowed myself to consider was a simpler and more uncomfortable possibility, that some of my daughters, not all, perhaps not even most, but some, had been coming home for Eleanor. And now that Eleanor was gone, the reason to come had gone with her, that their father, steady, solvent, reliable, present, was someone they took for granted in the specific, unexamined way that people take for granted the structures that have always held their weight. That I had been, for some time, the man who held everything and was acknowledged for nothing. A man they could leave alone at Christmas with 6-place settings and not lose a moment's sleep over. I lay in the dark and I thought about that. And then I thought about my estate attorney, Warren Hughes, who had been after me for 2 years to update the documents that had been drafted when Eleanor was alive and that no longer reflected the current reality of my life and my intentions. I thought about my financial advisor, Marcus Webb, who had been encouraging me to consolidate certain accounts and simplify my portfolio structure. I thought about the rental property in Charlotte that I had been meaning to decide about. I thought about several other things. By the time the sky began to lighten on Christmas morning, I had not slept, but I had made a series of very clear decisions. I got up. I made coffee. I put one of the leftover rolls in the toaster oven. And at 8 o'clock on Christmas morning, I called Warren Hughes on his cell phone, because Warren was the kind of attorney who had told me years ago to call him whenever I needed to, and I believed him. He answered on the second ring. "Warren," I said, "I need to see you the day after Christmas. All day if necessary." A pause. "Everything all right, ZAHA?" "Not entirely," I said, "but it will be. I want to stop right here and ask, if your family left you alone at Christmas after promising to be there, what would you have done? Would you have called them out? Let it go? Tell me in the comments below. because what I did next is something people either completely understand or completely don't, and I want to know which one you are. Warren Hughes had been my estate attorney for 22 years. He was 63, methodical, and possessed of the particular quality of good attorneys who have seen most things, an absence of surprise that was not indifference but perspective. He had drafted Eleanor's and my original wills together, had updated them twice as the girls grew up and the estate grew more complex, and had sat across from me in the terrible weeks after Eleanor's death and helped me navigate the paperwork of grief with a combination of professional precision and genuine human decency that I had not forgotten. He met me at his office at 9 on the 26th. He had cleared the day, as I'd asked. His assistant brought coffee and closed the door, and Warren sat across from me with a legal pad and his reading glasses and waited for me to begin. I told him about Christmas Eve. Not emotionally. I had spent Christmas Day processing the emotion, eating leftover rib roast alone, watching the snow that had started falling at noon as though the sky had decided to underline the silence of the house. By the 26th, I had moved past the grief and into the clear, settled place I had been waiting for. The place where I could look directly at what was underneath. I told Warren what had happened, and then I told him what I wanted to do, and I watched his expression as I laid it out. He did not try to talk me out of it. He asked careful questions. He clarified my intentions in several areas where the legal implications required precision. And then he said, "You understand that some of this is reversible and some of it isn't?" "I understand," I said. "You want to proceed with all of it?" "I want to proceed with the parts that are immediately necessary," I said. "The rest we'll implement over the following weeks. Let me tell you what the estate looked like, because it matters for the story. Eleanor and I had built genuine financial stability over 35 years. I had retired 4 years ago from a senior position at a regional financial services firm, where I had worked for most of my career. The retirement package was solid. The investment portfolio, which Marcus had managed for 15 years, had performed well. The house in Asheville was paid off and worth, by current market assessment, approximately $840,000. In addition, there were 3 other significant assets. The first was a rental property in Charlotte, a well-maintained 4-bedroom house in a good neighborhood that I had purchased as an investment 18 years ago, and that had been generating reliable rental income ever since. The second was a portfolio of municipal bonds, steady and unexciting and not insubstantial. The third, and this was the one that mattered most for the story I am telling you, was a trust. Eleanor and I had established the trust 12 years ago as the primary vehicle for passing assets to the girls. The trust held the majority of our investment portfolio and was structured to distribute to the 5 daughters in equal shares upon my death, with the provision that certain assets could be distributed early at my discretion as trustee. In the years since Eleanor died, I had exercised that discretion 4 times. Lucy had received $60,000 toward the down payment on their current Charlotte home 3 years ago. Julianne had received $45,000 to capitalize her interior design business when she launched it 2 years ago. Susan had received $35,000 to help with the renovation costs on the home she and Marcus had purchased the year of Eleanor's death. Pauline had received $22,000 over the past 18 months in a series of smaller distributions that I had characterized to myself as helping her through a difficult period of transition. Margaret, steady, quiet, self-sufficient Margaret, had received nothing because Margaret had never asked for anything and I had always respected that enough not to offer. Total distributions from the trust in the 4 years since Eleanor's death, $162,000. 4 of my 5 daughters had taken a combined $162,000 from the trust one managed, had confirmed they would be at my Christmas table, and had not come. Let me be careful here, because I want to be fair. I do not believe, I have never believed, that the money was the reason they didn't come. I think the reasons they didn't come were more banal, and in some ways more painful than that. Comfort, inertia, the ease of choosing the path of least effort on a holiday evening, when it would have required a 2-hour drive, and the effort of presence. I think they had, each in their own way, allowed themselves to believe that their father was fine, that he was managing, that the empty chair at his table was a manageable sadness rather than an acute one, and that their own convenience was a forgivable priority. But the money and the absence existed in the same universe, and they needed to be addressed in the same conversation. Warren and I worked until 2 in the afternoon. By the time I left his office, the following actions had been initiated. The Charlotte rental property had been listed with a real estate agent, not on the public market yet, but with a specific buyer in mind. A colleague of Marcus's who had expressed interest in the property 18 months ago, and to whom Marcus had placed a call that morning. The sale would close within 30 days. The trust had been amended. The amendment, which I had absolute legal authority to make as sole trustee, restructured the distribution schedule and the conditions attached to distributions. I had not disinherited anyone. I am not a cruel man. But the amendment established that future discretionary distributions required a formal request, documentation of purpose, and my approval, and that the automatic equal share distribution upon my death was now preceded by a charitable bequest of a specific amount to 3 organizations that Eleanor had cared about deeply: her college scholarship fund, a local hospice, and the children's literacy nonprofit she had volunteered with for 11 years. The girl's share remained, but it was no longer unconditional, and it was no longer the first thing in line. And the joint investment account, the one that held a portion of the portfolio in a structure that had allowed access to be shared, was consolidated into the trust as a trust-only asset. The daughters had never had direct access to this account, but they had known it existed and had always understood it as part of what would come to them. The consolidation changed nothing about their ultimate inheritance, but it changed the visibility of it. It moved it from a thing they could see and approximately calculate to a thing that was managed, discretionary, and contingent. Warren printed the amended trust documents and I signed them at his conference table at 1:47 in the afternoon on December 26th. I drove home in the early winter dark. I made dinner for one. I sat by the fireplace. I read for 2 hours a biography of a civil engineer I admired, which Eleanor had given me for my birthday 3 years ago, and which I had been meaning to get to ever since. At 9 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Lucy. "Dad," she said, and her voice had the quality of someone who had been in a conversation before this call, a recent, charged conversation with someone who had told her something. "I just got an alert from my investment platform. The account, it says there was a transfer. I'm not sure what happened, but it looks like." "I consolidated several accounts," I said pleasantly. "Just some estate housekeeping. Long overdue." A pause. "What does that mean?" "The balance shows. The assets are in the trust," I said, "where they've always been intended to be. But I could see the balance before. It looked accessible," I said. "It wasn't technically, but I understand why the visibility created an impression." A longer pause. "Dad," Lucy said carefully, "is everything okay?" "Everything is fine," I said. "I've been doing some thinking, that's all. About the estate, about the future. All things I should have attended to earlier." "Can we talk about this?" she said. "Maybe next week? I could come up to Asheville." "I'd love that," I said. "I'll have the guest room ready." I hung up. 12 minutes later, Julian called. Same alert, same question, a different tone, less careful than Lucy, more direct, the slight edge of a woman who had decided that concern was the appropriate register. I gave her the same answer. Susan called at 9:47. She was more pointed. She used the word worried, but the worry was positioned in a way that was not entirely about my welfare. Margaret did not call. Margaret, I was certain, had received the same alert and had sat with it and decided either that it was my business to manage or that she would wait and ask me in person. This was consistent with everything I knew about her. Pauline still had not been in contact. I went to bed at 10:30. I slept, for the first time in 2 nights, deeply and without interruption. In the morning, I began to make arrangements for the new year. Tell me what you think in the comments right now, because I know half of you are nodding and half of you are uncomfortable, and I want to hear from both sides. Was this too far? Not far enough. What would you have done? Drop your thoughts below, because what happens when my daughters start arriving in Asheville is where this story really begins. They came in the order I expected. Lucy first, because Lucy had always been the organizer, the one who, even as a child, responded to uncertainty by mobilizing. She arrived on the 29th in her silver SUV, 3 days after the account alerts had gone out, with David staying home with the children and a casserole dish in her hands because Lucy's instinct in any situation that required managing was to bring food. She was tall and dark-haired and looked more like Eleanor than any of the others, and the sight of her coming up the porch steps with that casserole dish gave me a moment of complicated emotion that I allowed to pass through me and settle. I let her in. I made coffee. I put the casserole in the refrigerator, and we sat at the kitchen table, and I let her start. "Dad," she said, "we need to talk about the estate changes." "Okay," I said. "Warren Hughes confirmed that the trust was amended on the 26th, she said. She had clearly called Warren, who had clearly told her, correctly, that the amendments had been made, and that she was welcome to review the updated documents with her own attorney. I'm not trying to make this about the money." "Good," I said. "But I want to understand what's happening. You've always been so clear about the plan, about what you and Mom set up, and suddenly 3 days after Christmas you're making major changes without telling anyone," and she stopped. "Are you okay? Health-wise? Is there something you're not?" "I am in excellent health," I said. "I had my annual physical in October. Blood pressure normal, cholesterol managed, nothing of concern." "Then why?" "Lucy," I said. "Why do you think?" She looked at me. Something moved across her face, a recognition, quickly followed by something more defensive. "The Christmas thing," she said. "The Christmas thing," I agreed. "Dad," I explained. "David's parents came into town, and it was just easier." "You confirmed the week before," I said. "You said you'd be here by 4. "I know, and I should have called sooner when the plans changed. That was wrong of me." "Yes," I said. "It was." A pause. "But the estate. The estate has nothing to do with punishment," I said, and I meant this carefully, because it was important and I needed her to hear it correctly. "I'm not taking things away from you because you didn't come to Christmas. I'm reorganizing my affairs in a way that reflects my life as it currently exists. Eleanor and I designed that trust together for a family that was a particular shape. Eleanor is gone. The family has changed. It makes sense for the documents to reflect the current reality." "And what is the current reality?" Lucy asked. I looked at my eldest daughter across the kitchen table, at the woman who had been the first person to make Eleanor and me parents, who had learned to walk in this house, who had sat at this table for 30 years of ordinary meals. "The current reality," I said, "is that I am 68 years old, I live alone, and I had 6 place settings on my table on Christmas Eve and sat there by myself for the entire evening. That is the current reality." The silence was complete. Lucy looked at the table. Her hands were wrapped around her coffee mug, tightly, I noticed. She was not a woman who showed emotion easily, but I could see it moving under the surface. Something uncomfortable and real. "I didn't think," she started. "No," I said gently. "That's the thing. You didn't think. None of you did. Because you've all made an assumption, without examining it, that I'm fine. That the house is fine. That whatever holiday I'm spending alone is a manageable thing that doesn't require your presence or your consideration. You never said you weren't fine," she said, and there was something almost defensive in it, but also, underneath that, something that sounded like genuine bewilderment. "A father shouldn't have to say that to his children," I said. "When he sets a table for 6 and calls every one of you to confirm, and you all say yes, he shouldn't have to explain that he means it." She was quiet for a long time. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said finally. And it was different from the "I'm sorry" she'd offered on the phone on Christmas Eve. That one had been quick and managed, the apology of someone exiting a moment of inconvenience. This one was slower, more weighted, the apology of someone sitting inside the thing she had done. "Thank you," I said. "What can I do?" she said. "You can come to dinner on New Year's Day," I said. "All of you. I'm asking your sisters the same thing. Bring David and the children." She blinked. "Okay," she said. "Yes, of course. And in the meantime," I said, "you can trust me to manage my estate as I see fit." She accepted this. She didn't love it, but she accepted it, because Lucy, whatever her failures of attention, was not a foolish woman. She understood when a conversation had reached its conclusion. Julianne arrived on the 30th, without a casserole, with more edge and less patience than Lucy, but the same core discomfort underneath. Her conversation at the kitchen table followed a similar structure and reached a similar place. She said she was sorry 3 times. The first time quickly and reflexively, the second time with more substance, and the third time quietly, almost to herself, in a way that suggested she was apologizing to someone other than just me. I thought she might be apologizing to Eleanor. Susan came on the 31st, on New Year's Eve, and her conversation was the sharpest of the 3. Susan was a high school principal. She managed difficult conversations professionally, And she brought that skill to this one, which meant she was direct and organized and moved through the discomfort faster than the others. The Charlotte property is listed, she said, 5 minutes in. It is, I said. You bought that before I moved to Charlotte, she said. I always assumed that it would stay in the family, I said. Yes. Susan, I said. That property has been generating income for 18 years. It has never been promised to anyone. The assumption that it would remain accessible was an assumption, not an agreement. She was quiet. Then, is it already sold? The sale is in process, I said. It will close in approximately 3 weeks. She absorbed this. I could see her calculating, not greedily. That was not Susan's nature, but practically, the way a planner calculates. Is this all because of Christmas? She said. Christmas was a symptom, I said. The diagnosis is older. She looked at me steadily. What does that mean? It means, I said, that since your mother died, I have been sitting in this house watching my family drift into the assumption that I am a resource rather than a person. That the checks I write for down payments and business launches are more reliably present than I am expected to be. That what I represent to my children is mostly financial security and the occasional holiday obligation. The directness of it cost me something. But Susan, of all the girls, needed it said plainly. She sat with it. The clock on the kitchen wall marked seconds. Outside, the last afternoon of the year was pressing its cold light against the windows. I don't think of you that way, she said finally. I believe you, I said. But what we intend and what we practice are not always the same thing. She looked down, then up. Then, with the abruptness of a woman who processes fast and commits hard. I'm sorry, Dad. I should have come. I had a reason and the reason was real, but I should have called you on December 23rd and told you rather than letting you set a place for me. I'm sorry. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. Thank you, I said. New Year's Day. Dinner. Everyone. I'll be here, she said. Margaret arrived on the morning of New Year's Eve, without being asked. She knocked on the door at 9:30, and when I opened it, she was standing on the porch in her coat with her hands in her pockets, and her face doing the particular thing Margaret's face did when she was feeling something she was not yet ready to name. She stepped inside. She took off her coat. She walked to the kitchen, put on the electric kettle the way she had done since she was a teenager, and sat at the kitchen table. I shouldn't have sent that text, she said. No, I said. You shouldn't have. I don't have an explanation that makes it better, she said. I made a bad choice. I chose easy over important, and I felt terrible about it since 10 minutes after I sent the message. Why didn't you call? She looked at me with Eleanor's honesty, the quality she had inherited most completely, the capacity to see something clearly and say it without softening. Because I was ashamed, she said. And because I didn't know how to call and say I was sorry without it turning into a conversation about all the ways I've been absent since Mom died, and I wasn't ready for that conversation. Are you ready now? I asked. She thought about it honestly, the way Margaret thought about everything. I think I've been trying to make myself ready since the 24th, she said. I'm not all the way there, but I'm closer than I was. That's enough, I said. We talked for 3 hours. Not about the estate. Not about the accounts or the property or Warren Hughes. About Eleanor. About what the house had felt like in the years before she got sick, and what it felt like now, and what it cost to come back to it. Margaret told me something that I had not known. That for her, coming home to this house was the hardest grief she carried, because she associated it so completely with her mother that walking through the door felt like losing Eleanor again each time. You could have told me that, I said. I know, she said. I think I was protecting you from knowing that your house was painful for me. Which wasn't. That wasn't fair to you. No, I said. But I understand it. She stayed for lunch. She helped me prepare for New Year's Day dinner. She set the table, not 6 places, this time, but 13, because between the 5 daughters there were enough partners and children to fill the room, if everyone came. I watched her set the table with Eleanor's good china, the same china I had set on Christmas Eve, and I felt something that was not yet healed, but was moving in the direction of healing. The direction that requires time and presence and the willingness to be in the same room with the hard thing. Pauline called on New Year's Eve at 11 in the morning. Her voice was thin and tight in the way of someone who has been carrying something for 11 days without being able to put it down. Dad, she said, I need to see you. Come for dinner tomorrow, I said. Everyone's coming. A pause. I mean before that. Just us. I told her to come that afternoon. I need to hear from you right now. Drop a comment below. Which daughter do you think understood it the fastest? And what do you think Pauline is about to say? Because her story is the one that made me question every decision I had made in the past 4 years. Tell me your thoughts. Pauline arrived at 3 in the afternoon on New Year's Eve. She was 33 years old and she looked, standing on my porch, younger than that. Or perhaps just smaller, in the way that people look smaller when they are carrying something too heavy for the size of them. She had Eleanor's coloring, the lighter hair, the particular quality of eyes that seemed to change shade depending on the light, and she had, from the time she was small, the quality that had always made me worry about her most. She felt things without the protective layer that most people develop by adulthood. The world reached her more directly than it reached other people. I had always worried that this made her more vulnerable. I was beginning to understand, standing in the doorway looking at her, that it also made her more honest. She came in. She sat on the couch rather than the kitchen table, which told me this conversation was going to be different from the others. The kitchen table was for practical conversations. The couch was for the other kind. I sat across from her. She did not begin with an apology, which surprised me. She began with a question. "Dad," she said, "how long have you been alone? Really alone, not just physically. How long has it felt like no one was paying attention?" I looked at my youngest daughter. "A while," I said carefully. "How long?" I thought about it honestly. About the decay of the orbit. About the Easters and the shortened Thanksgivings and the calls that became less frequent. About the 4 years since Eleanor. "Probably 3 years," I said. "Fully. Before that it was gradual." She nodded. She was looking at her hands. "I have something to tell you," she said. "And I need you to hear it as information, not as an excuse for Christmas. Because it's not an excuse. I should have come regardless. But I need to tell you because I've been not telling you for 8 months, and it's become too heavy." "Tell me," I said. What Pauline told me over the following hour was something that reorganized my understanding of the previous year, and, in some ways, of the previous 3 years, in ways I was not fully prepared for. 8 months earlier, Pauline had been diagnosed with depression. Not situational blues, not the ordinary low tides of a life in transition. Clinical depression, assessed and confirmed by a psychiatrist in Raleigh, where she had been living at the time. She had been in treatment since, medication, weekly therapy with a woman she trusted, the slow and non-linear work of getting better. She had told none of us. Not her sisters. Not me. She had managed the between jobs and between apartments phase of her life, which I had observed with the worried, helpless concern of a father who didn't know how to help, while simultaneously managing an illness she had told no one about, alone, in an apartment in Raleigh, convincing herself that disclosure would be a burden. "On Christmas Eve," she said, "I was having one of the worst days I'd had in months. My therapist was away for the holidays and I couldn't get myself. I literally could not get myself out of the apartment. Not physically. I couldn't do it." She paused. "I should have called you. I should have said, 'Dad, I am not okay tonight. I am not coming. Please check on me.' Instead, I didn't answer because I didn't have language for what was happening that didn't involve telling you the whole thing, and I wasn't ready to tell you the whole thing." The room was very quiet. I thought about Christmas Eve, about sitting at the table waiting, about the call to Susan at 5 o'clock, the calls to Lucy and Julianne, the single text from Margaret, the silence from Pauline, about assuming, in the way I had perhaps unfairly assumed, that all 5 of them had made the same comfortable, careless choice. Pauline had not made a comfortable choice. Pauline had been in her apartment on Christmas Eve fighting something I hadn't known was there, alone, because she had decided that telling me would be a burden. My 33-year-old daughter had been suffering for 8 months and had protected me from knowing it. "Pauline," I said. My voice was not entirely steady. "I'm not telling you this so you'll feel bad about the estate stuff," she said quickly. "I mean it. What you did, I understand it. I do. And honestly, the alert, the account notification, the fact that something changed, it was the first thing in 8 months that made me think, my father is not okay either. My father is telling me something is wrong without saying it in words. And it made me pick up the phone for the first time in 11 days. She looked up at me. "You woke me up. I don't mean that as a compliment to the method, but it's what happened." I stood up from my chair and I crossed the room and I sat down beside my youngest daughter on the couch and I put my arms around her and she leaned into it, not the careful, managed way that adults receive comfort from their parents, but the full, unguarded way of a person who has been without it for too long and does not have the resources left to perform independence. We sat like that for a while. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, into her hair. "Of all the things, why did you decide this was the one to carry alone?" "Because you lost Mom," she said. "And I watched you hold it together and manage everything and take care of all of us. And I thought, I can't give him one more thing to hold. He's already holding so much." I tightened my arms around her. "You are not a thing I hold," I said. "You are my daughter. You are not cargo. You are the person. You are always the person." She cried, not quietly, the real kind, the accumulated kind, the kind that comes out when 8 months of too careful management finally finds a safe enough place to release. I held on and let it happen, and I thought about Eleanor, about how she would have known something was wrong months ago, would have driven to Raleigh and sat on Pauline's couch and stayed until she understood the full picture. About how Eleanor's absence had left a gap in the family's ability to see each other that none of us had adequately compensated for. We had all been managing Eleanor's absence individually, privately, in our separate homes and separate lives, and the managing had made us strangers to each other's actual experience. The daughters had lost their mother, and their instinct was to protect their father from additional grief. I had lost my wife, and my instinct was to be strong, to manage, to not make demands. And in all that mutual protecting, we had lost the thing that actually mattered, the contact. The honest, present, unmanaged contact of people who belong to each other. When Pauline had quieted, I made tea. We sat in the kitchen table, this time, because the conversation had moved into the practical, and I asked her everything I should have been asking for 8 months. About the diagnosis and the treatment, about the therapist she trusted, about the medication and how it was working, about her daily life and what she needed. She answered all of it, slowly at first, then with increasing ease, the way people speak when they have been silent for too long and find, in the speaking, that the silence was the heavier burden. "I need to tell you something now," I said, when she had finished. She looked at me. "When I made those changes to the estate," I said, "I acted from a place of pain. That is not a full excuse, but it is an honest explanation. I was sitting at a table I had set for 6 people, alone, on Christmas Eve, and what I understood in that moment was that I had allowed my family to drift into an arrangement where I was present and assumed and never quite seen. And the only leverage I had, the only way I knew to make the drift visible, was the money." "I know," she said. "The changes I made are not permanent," I said. "The trust amendment can be revised. The property sale is proceeding because it makes financial sense regardless, but the trust structure, that was a message, and the message has been received, and I don't need it to remain exactly as I wrote it." "You don't have to change it for me," Pauline said. "What you do with the estate is yours. What I want to do with it is what Eleanor and I intended," I said, "which was to leave something to my children that honored what we built. Not to use it as a weapon and not to give it in conditions of indifference. Between those two things." She was quiet. "Then, what can I do?" "Come to dinner tomorrow," I said. "And after that, you tell me what you need. Not what you think I can handle. What you actually need. And I will tell you the same. And we will be 2 people who are honest with each other, the way your mother was honest with everyone. Because that was the thing that held us all together, and we have been without it for too long." Her eyes filled again. She pressed them with the back of her hand. "Okay," she said. "Okay, Dad. One more thing," I said. She looked at me. "Your therapist," I said. "She comes back from the holidays when?" "January 3rd, Pauline said." "Call her tomorrow," I said. "After dinner. Make the appointment for that week. Don't wait." "Okay. And I'm going to ask Warren to look at whether there are any practical support arrangements we can put in place. Not charity, not handouts. A real structure that means you are not alone with this financially while you're getting stable." She started to protest, and I held up one hand. "Not a discussion," I said. "An announcement." She closed her mouth. Then, despite everything, she almost smiled. The Eleanor smile, the one that appeared when someone had said something both immovable and entirely from love. "You've always done that," she said. "Done what?" "Made things into announcements when you didn't want to argue about them." "I learned it from your mother," I said. "She did it better." "She did everything better," Pauline said softly. "Yes," I agreed. "She did." We sat with that for a moment. With Eleanor, with the 4 years of her absence, with all the things her presence had made possible that her absence had made difficult, with the gap that no one could fill but that all of us, perhaps, could arrange ourselves more thoughtfully around. Outside, the last light of New Year's Eve was fading over Asheville. Tomorrow, everyone was coming to dinner. I have to stop here, because what happened at that New Year's Day table is something I have thought about every day since. But before I get there, I need to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Did Pauline's story change how you see this? Did it change how you see what I did? Tell me honestly, because I wrestled with it, and I'm still wrestling, and your thoughts matter to me. New Year's Day arrived clean and cold. Asheville does winter well. Not the brutal, gray winter of further north, but a crisp, clear-skied cold that makes the mountains visible in a way they aren't always, the ridgelines sharp against a sky so blue it looks invented. I stood on the back porch at 7 in the morning with my coffee and watched the light come up over the ridge, and I thought about Eleanor, because I thought about Eleanor every morning, but especially on mornings that were going to matter. She would have been cooking since 6. She would have already called at least 2 of the girls to ask if they were bringing anything and to specify exactly what she needed and what she absolutely did not need more of. She would have had the good china out and the table set and a candle in every room, and the house would have smelled, by 7 a.m., like something that made the word home feel exact and necessary. I was not Eleanor, but I had her recipes, and I had the good china, and I had her cast iron Dutch oven and the standing rib roast I had bought on December 30th in preparation for a meal I had committed to regardless of how the conversations went. I cooked. I set the table for 13, 5 daughters, for partners, 3 grandchildren, and myself, the chair at the head of the table that had been Eleanor's assigned seat for 30 years and that I had taken over with a combination of practical necessity and persistent discomfort, because sitting where Eleanor sat was something I was still negotiating with myself. They arrived between noon and 2. Lucy and David came first, with the children tumbling out of the SUV and up the porch steps with the unself-conscious energy of people who have not yet learned to manage their own enthusiasm. The grandchildren, 8, 6, and 4, came into the house and immediately and instinctively found every breakable object in the first floor, as they always did, as though they were conducting a rapid audit. I intercepted the 4-year-old near Eleanor's crystal glasses, and we had a brief and serious conversation about looking not touching, which he received with the solemn, temporary sincerity of a 4-year-old fully intending to do whatever he wanted at the first available opportunity. Lucy hugged me in the doorway. A real hug, not the quick, managed embrace of someone completing a social transaction, but the hug of a woman who had sat at my kitchen table 3 days ago and said I'm sorry in the way that meant it. "It smells like Christmas," she said, into my shoulder. "It smells like your mother's rib roast," I said. She pulled back and looked at me, and there was something in her face, a moisture she didn't pursue, a deliberate turning toward practicality. "Can I help in the kitchen?" "You can keep the 4-year-old away from the china," I said. She laughed, the real laugh. The Lucy before adulthood made her careful laugh. "Done." Julianne came next, with her partner of 2 years, a steady, kind man named Terrence who brought a very good bottle of wine and immediately made himself useful in the way of people who understand that the best thing you can do in someone else's kitchen is ask what needs doing and then do it without commentary. Susan and Marcus arrived at 1 with their teenage stepchildren from Marcus's first marriage. Thoughtful, phone-absorbed teenagers who nonetheless ate with genuine appetite and could be occasionally coaxed into real conversation if you asked the right question. Susan handed me a pie, homemade, which surprised me, and said, quietly, "Marcus's mother's recipe." She insisted. I told her to tell Marcus's mother thank you. Margaret came alone, as she usually did, and she came in quietly and went directly to the kitchen and began doing things without being asked. The Eleanor move, the one that I had always found comforting in Margaret, because it was so clearly something she had absorbed from her mother rather than decided. And Pauline came last, at 2:15, in the coat she'd worn to my porch the day before, and the slightly steadier face of someone who had actually slept, for the first time in too many days. She hugged me at the door and said nothing, and I said nothing, and that was enough. We sat down to dinner at 3 o'clock. 13 people at the table Eleanor and I had eaten at for 30 years. The good china, the crystal glasses, the standing rib roast, the green bean casserole, the sweet potato gratin, the the rolls from the bakery on Maple Street. I looked at the table before I sat down, just for a moment, from the doorway, before anyone noticed I was standing there. Looked at the assembled, specific, irreplaceable reality of my family filling the space that had been silent 12 days ago. I sat down. The meal was loud in the way that tables full of children are always loud, and warm in the way of people who have given themselves permission to be present, and ordinary in the best sense. The conversations overlapping, the children requiring management, someone spilling something with the inevitability of someone always spilling something. Marcus telling a story about a work situation that turned out to be funnier than it had sounded in the setup. Lucy's 8-year-old asking me what the mountains were called and listening with genuine focus when I told her. After the main course, before the pie, I stood up. I had not planned a speech. I am not a speech-making man. Eleanor was the one who had the instinct for the moment when something needed to be said aloud. But I found myself standing, and the table went quiet, and it seemed the thing was going to happen whether I had prepared for it or not. I want to say something, I said. I'll try to be brief. Lucy's expression was careful. Susan's was attentive. Julianne was watching me with the particular focus of someone who is monitoring an emotional situation. Margaret was still, the way Margaret was always still. Pauline had her hands around her water glass and her eyes on the tablecloth. 12 days ago I sat at this table alone, I said. And I was in enough pain about that to make some decisions that were driven more by that pain than by careful thought. I want to acknowledge that. What I did, the estate changes, the account restructuring, some of it was appropriate, and some of it was a 68-year-old man using the only tool he could identify to make the people he loves understand that he was not invisible. I paused. That was not the most elegant approach. A small sound from someone. I thought it was Julianne, something between a laugh and something more emotional. But I want to also say this, I continued. The conversations I had with each of you this week were the most honest conversations we have had since your mother died. And I needed those conversations. I needed to hear from Margaret that coming home is painful because of what this house holds. I needed to hear from Pauline what she has been carrying. I needed to say out loud, to all of you, that I have been sitting in this house feeling like the furniture, present, useful, assumed, but not quite seen. I looked around the table. We have been protecting each other from our actual experiences for 4 years, and the protecting has been making us strangers. The children were quiet in the way that children go quiet when adults are saying something they don't entirely understand but recognize as serious. Your mother was the person who made sure we saw each other, I said. She is gone, and we have none of us adequately figured out how to do that without her. I include myself in that. I have been managing my grief in private and projecting fineness and not asking for what I actually needed, which was presence. Which was you. I looked at my daughters, all 5 of them, in order, the way I had looked at them when they were small, and I was trying to reach each one individually in the same moment. I am asking now, not as a requirement, not with financial conditions attached. As a father who is 68 years old and who would like, for whatever time is left, to actually live in the same family as his children rather than at a polite distance from it. The table was very quiet. Lucy pressed her fingers to her eyes. Susan looked at the ceiling briefly, the Susan move, the one she used to control emotion in public. Julianne was crying without pretending not to. Margaret was looking at me with Eleanor's face wearing Eleanor's expression of clear, undefended feeling. Pauline looked up from the tablecloth. "We're here, Dad," she said. Her voice was steady in the specific way of someone who has made a decision and is stating it. "We're here now." "Yes," I said. "You are." I sat down. Lucy's 8-year-old, who had been following all of this with the focused incomprehension of someone trying to understand adult weather, asked if we could have pie now. The table laughed, the released, cathartic laugh of a room that needed to move from one thing into the next, and I said yes, we could absolutely have pie now. In the weeks that followed, I made good on the promise of revision. Warren Hughes and I met again in mid-January. The trust amendment was modified, not reversed, but refined. The charitable bequests remained, because Eleanor had cared about those organizations, and the bequests honored her regardless of everything else. The conditions on discretionary distributions were simplified to a requirement of conversation rather than formal documentation. I was not a corporation, I was a father, and what I had wanted was honesty, not bureaucracy. The Charlotte property sale closed. The proceeds went into the trust. The numbers were what they were. I had a call with each of my daughters, separately, about finances, not as an accounting, but as an honest conversation about what each of them needed and what I was able and willing to provide, and how we would talk about it openly rather than in the ways we had been talking about it before, which was mostly by not talking about it at all. Pauline's call lasted the longest. We set up a practical support structure, a defined monthly amount, treated as a loan that converted to a gift after 2 years of her maintaining employment, which was her idea, not mine, because Pauline's pride was real and deserved to be honored. Her therapist came back on the 3rd of January, as scheduled. Pauline called her. I know this because Pauline told me. In the Wednesday call we established as our regular check-in, which was her suggestion and which I accepted with the composed relief of a man who had been waiting to be needed in the specific way that fathers need to be needed. Dr. Franklin, the couple's therapist I had heard about from a colleague and whose name I had been given for entirely different reasons, became, in a slight adjustment of purpose, a family therapist. Not all 5 daughters, not all at once, not in any structured intensive way, but a resource, available, that several of the girls began using individually over the following months when they needed someone to talk to who could hold the complexity of the family system. Margaret started coming home more. Not every Sunday. She was not a Sunday dinner person in the way some people are not Sunday dinner people, and I was not going to remake her in a shape that wasn't hers. But once a month, reliably, she drove her 10-year-old Subaru up to Asheville, and we ate dinner and sat in the living room and talked about books and about Eleanor and about the things that mattered. She told me, 3 months in, that it was getting easier to walk through the door. The house is still full of her, she said. Yes, I said. But it's full of you too, she said. I think I forgot that for a while. I was seeing the absence and not the presence. I thought about that for a long time afterward. About presence and absence and the way grief can make you myopic, focus so completely on what is gone that you stop seeing what remains. I had done it too. In my own way, in the managing and the fineness and the careful self-sufficiency of the years since Eleanor, I had made myself nearly invisible in my own home, had gradually reduced myself to the furniture of my family's life, and then had been genuinely wounded when the furniture was taken for granted. Eleanor would have said, well, ZAHA, what did you expect? You have to show up as a person if you want to be treated as one. She would have been right. She usually was. On Easter Sunday, 5 months after that Christmas Eve, all 5 daughters came to dinner. All the partners, all the children, the table full in the way I had dreamed it when I bought the rolls from the bakery on Maple Street. The good china, the crystal glasses, the house full of the noise and warmth of 13 people who belonged to each other. I stood in the doorway again, as I had on New Year's Day, and looked at it. Lucy's 4-year-old was being removed from the vicinity of the crystal glasses for the 4th time. Julianne and Terrence were having an argument about something that was clearly not serious, the kind of argument that is actually a display of comfort. Susan's stepchildren had, against all odds, been drawn into a real conversation with Margaret about a book and were looking at her with the slightly startled expression of teenagers who have accidentally found something interesting. Pauline was in the kitchen helping with the rolls, laughing at something the 8-year-old had said. The house full of Eleanor's absence and full of presence at the same time. I sat at the head of the table and I said grace. A short one, Eleanor's preference, and I looked at my 5 daughters and their people, and I thought, this is what I was protecting when I made those changes on December 26th. Not money, not assets, not the leverage of an old man reminding his children who holds the cards. This, the possibility of this, the table that was worth setting, even when no one came. The table that was worth setting again and again until the people you loved understood that you meant it. That the chair was there, that the place was set, that the door was always going to be open. I am 68 years old. I have made mistakes as a father, as a husband, as a man, some of them consequential, some of them the ordinary small failures of someone doing his best with imperfect materials. I have used money as a message when I should have used words. I have managed my grief in private when I should have let my children see it. I have set a table without teaching the people I loved how much the setting of it meant. But I have also raised 5 women who, when confronted with their own failures, when made to sit with the specific weight of what they had done, came home. All 5 of them, in their different ways, at their different paces, carrying their different versions of sorry, and they're different versions of trying harder. They came home. Eleanor would have said that was the only thing that mattered. She would have been right. She usually was. If you made it all the way to this last word, I am grateful. Drop a comment below and tell me which daughter's story hit you hardest. Tell me if you've ever used the only leverage you had to make someone see you. Tell me if you've ever been the one who didn't come and what made you finally show up. Tell me whatever this story stirred in you, because these stories, messy and human and full of the specific imperfection of real families, are the ones worth telling. And the only reason to tell them is you. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.